Welcome to Vineyard Hopkinton. As we follow Jesus together, we experience the Holy Spirit, create a multicultural community, and pursue kingdom of God justice.
We're continuing in our series through Proverbs this morning, and I love how connected the Bible is. How you can have this one book in the Old Testament written thousands of years before many of the books in the New Testament, and yet it's intricately connected in its story, in what it's bringing to us, the wisdom that it's bringing to us, because if you didn't know, the Bible is one big, long story of God's movement in our world. It's all his tale. He's working through all of it. And so as we're going to see this morning, the wisdom of Proverbs ties deeply to the teachings of Jesus, which ties deeply to the start of a new church in Acts chapter 2. So, any church folks in the room know what this morning is on the church calendar? Shout it out. Okay, say it a little bit clearer. That was a little weak. All at the same time. There we go. There we go. Okay, good job. Pentecost. So today's the day where we remember what happened a couple thousand years ago that we're told about in Acts chapter 2, where the church was born. It's literally the first time that we see the word church used to describe this thing that we're now a part of. And it was kind of created to describe this strange, spontaneous gathering that happened in the middle of Jerusalem after the Holy Spirit came and lit people's heads on fire. You can read it if you don't believe me. Acts chapter 2, Bible fact check me. Lit people's heads on fire, and then they run out into the streets, not screaming, but excited, and they start speaking in different languages, and there's 3,000 people at least that were told that come to know Jesus all in that one afternoon. And instantly, this gathering of 12 to like 100 some blows up and becomes a mega church all overnight. And it gives us this rich and powerful reminder of what can happen when the Holy Spirit comes, which is part of the reason that we want to create as many opportunities as possible for the Holy Spirit to come and to move among us, because who knows what he's going to do, right? And how he's going to do it. So in Acts chapter 2, we're given the beginning of the church, and we're told about some of the characteristics of an Acts 2 church, that they gathered regularly for worship, that they ate meals together, that they would regularly pray prayers and other acts of worship that would express gratitude to God, that they saw people choose to follow Jesus for the first time every single day is what it says. And that there was a unique financial generosity which allowed them to share money to those in need, both inside the community and outside of the community. I want to highlight this last part because we're going to talk about money from Proverbs this morning. But I want to think about this unique financial generosity for a second. What does it take for that to have been an initial, immediate characteristic of a brand new church? I think two things, probably more, but at least two. The first is that it means that the Holy Spirit actually cares what you do with your money. And that if you're allowing yourself to be filled with the Holy Spirit, to put it in New Testament terms, that you are going to want to live in a way that is deeply generous. And the second thing is that the leaders of the early church must have talked about money early and often. This was a regular thing that they were digging into. So we're going to talk about it today. But before I go any further in that, let me tell you a story. In the 60s and 70s, way before Rick, I was ever born. He's like, I'm coming after you. Way before I was born, if you were famous, you may have had your portrait painted for the princely sum of $50,000 back then, which is about $400,000 today, by a man named Dimitri Vale. Dimitri Vale lived in Dallas, Texas. was kind of the picture of an eccentric artist, wealthy artist during that time. He painted the portraits of people like Carol Burnett and Johnny Carson and Mickey Rooney, Betty White, people that the younger folks in the room are like, who are you talking about? Maybe you've heard of these two. He also painted the portraits of a couple of sitting presidents, John F. Kennedy and Lyndon B. Johnson, one of which still hangs in LBJ's home and library. So he was kind of a big deal back then. The backstory to this guy is that in the 20s, he ran away from home when he was in his teens and did the eccentric artist thing, trying to become wealthy and famous, which was his goals, according to people who knew him. And it worked. He was talented enough that he was able to actually do it. So he ends up moving to Dallas, but his life outside of his skill was bad. It was not good. He was married 5 times in his almost 90 years. He was wealthy, but when you have 5 alimony payments, you're not wealthy anymore. And so he was broke by the end of it. His body started breaking down, probably from some of the other things that he was doing on the regular. And so for the last 2 decades of his life, he couldn't paint. And he was just the portrait of a guy who lived into this. He would throw these huge parties in his Dallas mansion with all kinds of celebrities coming. And then when he got older, he would do yoga in his front yard and wear outfits that his neighbors were not very excited that he was wearing in his front yard as he would do yoga and go jogging. So you could picture that for yourself. He did not age particularly well. In 1989, at 87, there was a knock on his door and a lawyer showed up who offered to restore all of his fame and money. And he signed up. And he signed over power of estate to this new attorney and gave him everything, basically. Within months, he married wife number 5. Within 2 years, he died angry and broke. For the next 18 years after his death, there were legal cases between his last wife and that attorney fighting over who got the money. In 2009, when it finally was all over, the judge said, kind of probably in like a huff of like defeat, basically he said that the trust of Dimitri Vale is empty. There is nothing to give. There is no money, and he ended it then and there. After decades of trying to become wealthy and famous, he achieved one and everything else fell apart. I first heard this story 10 or so years ago from my aunt, who was showing me a portrait of my grandmother that had been painted by her brother, a guy named Robert Vale, who changed his name to Dimitri. Probably 40 to 50 years ago. He was not a glorified figure in that part of my family tree, but he's a well-known figure in that part of the family tree. A story of what can happen if you go down a certain path. Proverbs 23 says, "Don't wear yourself out trying to get rich, but be wise enough to know when to quit. In the blink of an eye, wealth disappears, for it will sprout wings and fly away like an eagle." Dimitri Vale, my great uncle, lived for wealth and it failed him. And in the Bible, the term that is used for that is not probably what we would consider kind, but it's clear. The Bible calls that living like a fool. And it's repeated all throughout. Especially in the book of Proverbs, foolishness and wisdom are pitted against each other as 2 opposite ways to live that are in no way equal. They lead you on very different paths. Fools, we're told, are people who choose to live in ways that are opposite to, separate from, different from the wisdom and the kind of fear is the word that the Proverbs uses of God. We might call it today, if we were to rewrite it in just straight English, we might say that it was basically being a fool is living a culturally normative life, following what everybody else says and does. Just trying to be like everybody else and hope, gosh darn it, that it's going to be good enough. And the Bible says that that's a foolish way to live. In 1 Corinthians 3, we're told about this when Paul says, stop deceiving yourselves. If you think you're wise by the world's standards, you need to become a fool to become truly wise. For the wisdom of this world is foolishness to God. As the scriptures say, he traps the wise in the snare of their own cleverness. And again, the Lord knows the thoughts of the wise. He knows they are worthless. If you're trying to live like everybody else and calling it wisdom, maybe you need to get a little bit more foolish. A little tongue-in-cheek, but clear enough if you've done it. We're going to look at the wise advice of the Proverbs and of Jesus around money this morning. And as we get ready to pray, I just want to encourage us to go into this conversation with humility. You know, I've heard it said that the wisest people are the most humble because they know that there's always something more to learn, something more to grow from. And when it comes to this subject, there's probably always something more for us to learn, right? So let's pray as we begin this morning. Holy Spirit, I do just ask for humility for us as we hear what it is that you have to say about how we spend our money. I know that there's so many defensive triggers that can pop up around this. We don't like people looking at these things and questioning how we're doing it. And so I just ask for grace for us, for humility, for wisdom to be what you bring, God. And I do just pray, Jesus, that the ways in which in any or all of our hearts that kind of the teeth of greed and wanting more have kind of grabbed a hold, that this morning that you'll bring freedom from that. That we can be people who live open-handed, generous lives like you've called us to. In Jesus' name, amen. So we're going to read from Proverbs. If you have a Bible, I'm going to be jumping around, though, because Proverbs is one of those books that's what you got to do. Honestly, I've always struggled to read Proverbs well. So if you're in that category, I'm with you. I understand that. It's not like the rest of the Bible. There's no stories. There's no narratives. There's no punchy lines at the end of it. There's no long histories or prophecies. It's just stuff that kind of feels like advice. And I don't always like reading a lot of advice in a row. Like, it starts to get a little overwhelming to me. But what I've learned is that Proverbs should not be read just simply like advice, and it shouldn't be read as guaranteed promises. So how do we read it well? 2 ways. We need to read it as God's invitation to learn wisdom from previous generations. If we hear the book of Proverbs as wise guidance given from a parent or a grandparent who loves us with kindness because they don't want us to do the things that they did, we might hear it a little bit clearer. Psalm 103 says that God's like this to us, that the Lord is like a father to his children, tender and compassionate to those who fear him. For he knows how weak we are, and he remembers that we are only dust. And the second thing is that we need to read it as probability statements, not as guarantees. So we need to read it in this way. If you honor God and you live according to the things that he's called us to live according to, there is a higher chance that your life will go good. And if you do not honor God, if you reject what it is that he's asking you to do, there is a higher chance that your life will not go well. No guarantees in that. We can all come up with outliers to that equation, right? We all know somebody who is not living a very good life and yet seems to have everything. And we know people living good lives who seem to have nothing. We understand the difference. And that's not what Proverbs is trying to do. It's telling us the path. It's better to live this way. So keeping all that in mind, there's 3 financial maxims that I want to encourage us in throughout Proverbs. 3 truths that I think if we allow them to sink in will bring freedom and help us just to live good, healthy financial lives. And I know money talk, again, can make us feel defensive. And I just want to say that I'm not saying these things as judge and jury over the decisions you've made, but as somebody who has probably struggled just as much, if not more, financially as you have, and is speaking from my own experience of learning the hard way. So the first thing is this, said in kind of the Proverbs way, don't be lazy, because fools are lazy. Instead, embrace hard work. Proverbs 10 says this, lazy people are soon poor, hard workers get rich. A wise youth harvests in the summer, but one who sleeps during harvest is a disgrace. Hard work doesn't guarantee huge bank accounts. Anybody worked hard and still does not make a ton of money? I'm not asking you really to raise your hand, but you know what I'm saying. Like, we understand that part. You can work really hard and not have huge bank accounts, but laziness is never connected to financial health long term. That is a guarantee. Proverbs 13 says this, wealth from get-rich-quick schemes quickly disappears. Wealth from hard work grows over time. If you spend your time trying to figure out a way to be financially successful without working hard, please stop. There is no amount of Tupperware, Amway, I don't know what all of them are, but you know what I'm talking about. There is no amount of those things. There is no amount of crowd working. That's a new young kid term for how to make money online without doing anything. There's no amount of that that's actually going to make your life successful. And this is why. Because you're created to work. The way that we're made by God is to be workers, people who are productive with our lives. If we think back to the garden, to the initial plan for humanity, it involved being productive. There was no part of it that was lazy. I don't think heaven is about being lazy either. We're not trying to get to a spot where we can lay down on the clouds and just play golf. There is something in us that is all about productivity and healthy work. So don't run away from that. Embrace it. Live into it in healthy ways. And when you see other people working hard, cheer them on. And yes, if you're a boomer, it may look different than the way that a Gen Zer works. The way I work is different from the way Brian works. That's a guarantee. Not that we're not boomer and Gen Zer. Don't worry about that one, Brian. I wasn't saying that. But there's different ways that we all work. And so cheer them on. Don't discourage and don't talk down. The number one piece of godly wisdom in the Bible about about money is work hard. Here's the second thing. Taking on unnecessary debt is foolish. Proverbs 22 says in 3 different verses stuff about this. Just as the rich rule the poor, so the borrower is servant to the lender. And then later on, don't agree to guarantee another person's debt or put up security for someone else. If you can't pay it, even your bed will be snatched out from under you. And it's a very vivid description of what happens with debt. The borrower is servant to the lender. I've learned this one the hard way. This is one of those that I've learned the hard way. Closed accounts, late payments, collections calling me, like lots of stress. I've dealt with this one the hard way in my life. debt in some ways can be fine. It's neutral. Most of us can't buy a house with cash, right? Especially not in Massachusetts. That's usually not a reality for us in our 20s or 30s. But debt in our culture, I think, is just a socially normative way to live outside your income. Credit cards give you the flexibility to buy whatever you want, right? At ridiculously high rates. The car dealership says that you can afford a $60,000 car loan. You know you cannot afford a $60,000 car loan, but they say you can, and why not get the best car if you're going to get any of the cars, right? But they want you to do that because that's how they make money. Everything around loans is not generosity or for ease. It's so that they can make money at the end. It's not about you. It is about them. That's the reality of debt. I spilled a little water. There we go. When I worked in banking before I became a pastor, I remember the first time that I had somebody bring in credit card debt of over $100,000. Yeah, it happened more than once. And I remember sitting down with this couple, and it was more like marriage counseling than it was financial counseling at that point, because the weight on them was visible. Their marriage was like crippling underneath the heaviness of that. If you spread out on minimum payments $100,000 in credit card debt at an average rate, it would take you 45 years to pay it off. You would pay over $150,000 in interest in that time. If you did it at $2,500 a month, which is a mortgage payment in Massachusetts, I lived in Ohio at that time, and that was a lot more than a mortgage payment. If you did it at that amount, you would still pay $55,000 in interest. There was nothing generous about the credit card companies for upping their their available balance in that. And the anxiety, the stress, it had just collapsed on top of them. Friends, if you're here and you know that reality, first let me say there's no judgment on that. But please, talk to me. I don't have a blank check, but I or other people in our church would be happy to walk through this with you. Don't let it force you down. Second thing, though, friends, don't let debt own you. Don't let it reach those points where the only answer is to collapse underneath it. I think really when it comes to debt, there's one word that describes what it is that drives it, and that's comparison. Debt is all about us comparing ourselves to other people. But everybody else has this. But all my friends have this. But the neighbors just did this to their house. But, we come up with all these comparison excuses. Don't let comparison be in charge. Embrace simplicity. It will make you look different. This one will make you look different in 2024 America. But you'll be happier, you'll be healthier, and you'll be able to follow Jesus in a way that is actually true to what it is that he's asking you to do. Here's the third thing that I think the book of Proverbs tells us. That foolishness is spending everything you make, and instead we need to create patterns of saving and giving. Proverbs 21 says, "The wise have wealth and luxury, but fools spend whatever they get." Again, in banking, I saw people make all kinds of financial decisions, both people making six figures and people way below the poverty line. Most of them were not the wisest decisions. In my 20s, especially my early 20s, I mirrored all of those decisions. And then I spent my late 20s and early 30s cleaning up those decisions because it takes a little while to do. But the debt and the stress and the weight of it does add up. Most people in the U.S. either spend more than they make or they spend exactly what they make. More or exactly? Do you know what's not more than what you make? Your salary. That will never be the case. Your salary is what it is, right? Not many people save or pay off debt. The standard rule, if you're curious about these sort of things, is the 50-30-20 rule. So you spend 50% of your income on your needs, 30% on your wants, and 20% on savings. Maybe in Massachusetts, it should be the 60-25-15, because things cost more here. That may have been written by somebody living in Alabama. That could be a reality. 60% on needs, 25 on wants, and 15 on savings. I don't know what it would be completely within our space, but I'm going to add another number to it, 10 plus. What if ours, as followers of Jesus, is supposed to be more like 50-20-20, 10 plus? 10 plus is God's call to generosity. The Bible repeats it over and over and over again, that we as followers of Jesus are supposed to give. It's supposed to be a regular part of how we live. And adding that 10 plus may feel like the heaviest thing that I could possibly throw on top of you. But as followers of Jesus, we're called to live differently. You might be saying, I can't even afford to save 20%. How am I going to give 10%? Work out a way. There is a way. And it may take time. It may take a plan. But getting to that spot is worth it. It may be a different set of numbers than 50, 20, 20, 10. I don't know what it's going to be exactly for you. But I do know that we're called to be generous. And as somebody who does not make a large salary and has a mortgage in Westboro and has kids and they want all the money and, has chosen to give 10% plus, and because of all these things, struggles financially from time to time, it's still worth it. Living this way is better. Giving to the church, I will never say that it is a silver bullet for your life being financially secure. And if I do, slap my hands right afterwards, okay? It's not. But it's what God asks us to do. It doesn't guarantee that you're going to get a pay raise next week, but it's what God asks us to do. And I have respect for the folks in our church who I've watched that have gone through hard financial seasons and have continued to give in healthy ways with boundaries, in ways that are appropriate for where they're at, because they know that that's what God has called them to do. I respect people in our church that are looking ahead to retirement and career changes and know that there's going to be a financially difficult aspect to that. And they've said, okay, while still within this, I'm going to continue to give because I know that it's what God has called me to do. Proverbs 11 says this, give freely and become more wealthy. Be stingy and lose everything. The generous will prosper, and those who refresh others will themselves be refreshed. Followers of Jesus live generously. It is one of the most commonly repeated things in the entire Bible, Old and New. It carries over. It is a constant thing in the Bible. And so, we don't say this very much. But I'm talking about money, so I feel like it would be wise to say it right here, right? We at Vineyard Church of Hopkinton need you to give generously to this church, okay? We'll say this clearly. In our culture, there is a system that we've created with nonprofits that if they need money, you know what they do? They hit you up. They tell you about it, right? We don't do that. We tried purposefully not to do that, but it's still a reality. It costs money to make this happen. It costs money to live out the mission that Jesus has given to our church. And we want to continue doing that. And we've tried to be as wise with it as we can. You know, inflation's gone up. We've tried to keep costs minimal. We've paid off our building. We've done the things that we should do. But we've also tried to be generous. You know, we do a mobile food pantry for 50 families every 2 weeks. And we're just guaranteeing that we're just going to keep doing that. We've partnered with Rob and Liz Davis, who are in Spain right now, for at least the next 3.5 years to continue paying for their trips at 6 weeks at a time over to Spain to do missions among vineyard churches over in Spain. And that costs money, and it's kind of extra, but we're committing to do that. Your coffee costs money. Electricity costs money. These things all are just realities, right? But the Bible encourages us to give generously to the church. And so if you're regularly giving to the church, we don't say this very often. Maybe we should say it more, but thank you. It matters a lot, and we're very grateful for it. So thank you. If you're not, and you consider this your church, my ask is simple. Don't do it because of me. Talk to Jesus about it. Pray about it. Ask him what he says. He'll talk to you. I have faith in that. So I want to pull all this together by looking at Jesus and a story he tells in Luke 12, verses 13 to 21, if you have your Bible there. Jesus didn't tell Proverbs-like statements very often. He usually did stories, and this is one of them. And this is what he has to say. Then someone called from the crowd, "Teacher, please tell my brother to divide our father's estate with me." And Jesus replied, "Friend, who made me a judge over you to decide such things as that?" And then he said, "Beware, guard against every type of greed. Life is not measured by how much you own." And he told them a story. A rich man had a fertile farm that produced fine crops, and he said to himself, "What should I do? I don't have room for all my crops." And he said, "I know, I'll tear down my barns and I'll build bigger ones. And then I'll have enough room to store all my wheat and other goods. And I'll sit back and say to myself, my friend, you have enough stored away for years to come. Now take it easy. Eat, drink, and be merry." If you call yourself your friend when you're talking in your head, now you feel better about yourself, right? My friend. Sounds a little funny. But God said to him, "You fool, you will die this very night. Then who will get everything you worked for?" Yes, a person is a fool to store up earthly wealth, but not have a rich relationship with God. Why was this man a fool? He was wealthy. He was productive. He was saving for his future. All those things are good, right? So what is it? It's the fact that he was driven by greed. All of his good wisdom was planted in the soil of greed, and so everything that was springing up was just a little off. And this is the advice, the wisdom that Jesus is giving us. Don't let your financial wisdom be tainted by greed. What are you using your money for? Is it used with generosity, with openness? Are you filled with gratitude and thankfulness to God for how well that he's taking care of you? Or are you saying, it's my money, I want what I want, and I'll get it? When you choose that view financially, Jesus is saying you get your reward. There it is. You got it. It's done. But we can have more. He says a person's a fool to store up earthly wealth if they do not have a rich relationship with God. The wise person places their hope for the future in the hands of Jesus. their hopes, which are things like their financial security or lack thereof, their health or lack thereof, their relationships with joy and sorrow kind of intermingled. Their future, they place it in the hands of Jesus. The word for rich that's used here means prosperous and wealthy. So he's saying that prioritizing obedience and intimacy with Jesus places you in a spot where you actually can be prosperous, where that could be a reality for you, because how you deal with your money affects your relationship with Jesus. Because as followers of Jesus, everything in our life is under the rule of King Jesus. King Jesus, who is kind and wise and generous and doesn't lack anything and is open-handed to those who know him. Following Jesus means that you will be provided for and that your life will be filled with wisdom and kindness and generosity, because that's what he promises if we live on the path of wisdom versus the path of foolishness.